Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. First of all, you can see, excuse me, you can see I'm wearing my Lawrenceville shirt. I studied at the Lawrenceville School. I went to Lawrenceville and boarded there. It's the world's #1 school. And I'd be glad to talk more about it, but I'd just be talking on a screen. And that's not what we're here for. We're here for chess. So without further ado, I'm going to present this game that I won about 5 minutes ago. Okay, so I played the Scandinavian defense. Um, Sometimes it's nice to get these moves in first pawn to d5 and then queen captures d5 as pre-moves. It gives your opponent a little bit of a jolt. So sometimes what's going on here, other times another guy pre-moving Scandinavian defense. So I played the Scandinavian defense as pre-move all the way through here. After here, I'm making moves based on some kind of quick decision. Because we're playing game in 3 minutes per side, so everyone's got to be on their toes and quick with their tactics and move decisions. Capturing on d4 will earn black pawn ahead. The pawn's already there. If the exchange of queens occurs, then the pawn is still ahead of what my opponent has captured. So here we have that exchange. Black's threatening knight to c2 check, forking the rook on a1 with the king and winning at least the exchange in the a1 corner. But it also looks like black will be well on his way to rescuing the knight from the a1 corner. Notice the knight only has these two squares when he's in this corner. But fortunately, in this version, bishop to f5 will allow the knight to come to c2, and then from there, there are choices like on knight to d4 or knight to b4, for instance. All right, my opponent takes strong action against knight to c2 check, cutting it out pretty much entirely, with the bishop covering the square while also developing a piece, and to just about as good a square as that piece might be developed, because my opponent's pawn on c4 is blocking any longer incursions towards black's queen side, any longer incursions towards black's queen side. So this is an excellent move. My opponent found, in my opinion, is excellent. Or it's computer best technically, but it's a heads up move. Knight f6, simply developing the knight, and after bishop to e3, what do we feel about bishop to e3? Against maybe bishop to f4, there's even bishop to g5. There will plot 3 as played, and bishop to d2 makes sense. So in this opening where we've worked ourselves to after black's 6th move, white has a lot of choices with his dark squared bishop, and chose to play the most forcing move, I think, of all those. Bishop to e3. Black must address the issue of this undefended knight. I chose to play c5 to do so. Here we see that the computer disagrees with this, considers this an inaccuracy. Disagrees is a strong word, a little bit of anthropomorphication, but the computer has called this an inaccuracy. My thoughts were, it's great if bishop takes d4, pawn takes d4, then black has the chance at a central pawn duo, and a strong one with e5 and d4. That's looking good also for clearing the way for black's dark squared bishop. Bishop b4 check, more protection for the pawn on if the bishop goes to c4. Protection for a different pawn if the bishop goes to d6, and there's always the pivot bishop to e7. So I'm not sure that this is really all that bad a move. I'd have to look at this more. Now with knight to c3, just a developing move. It's a good developing move. Bishop f5 is some kind of mistake. I think if bishop takes d4, I'm going to have to consult with the analysis on this. Bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, bishop takes c5. Right, so overall, white's going to go up ahead a pawn here. Bishop f5, knight takes f5, bishop takes c5, and with black to move in that position, white has secured equality in terms of material standing on the chessboard. Let's get back to review. Yeah, so this is just the move order of these captures. My opponent did poorly. This is a miss here. Bishop takes d4 because after c takes d4 and then getting the pawn on f5, I can capture the knight on c3. Actually, I'm not sure. I think mostly maintain the material as it were with black ahead at one pawn. But here, b3 is lousy, frankly. I'm critical. My opponent played b3 here. That I'm very critical of that move. The move would be b takes c3 to recoup some material, even if it means these really nasty double pawns that white would have on c3 and c4. Not all is lost. Black has to kick this bishop and then attack these double pawns. By that point, with the bishop on d3 supporting c4, black's not going to win anything, and black will not win those pawns, at least not right out. And even king d2 makes some sense, or king to e2, observing the square color of the opposing bishop. This will protect the bishop on d3. So yeah, I'm quite critical of my opponent's move b3. I love seeing it as a competitor. As an analyzer and a reviewer, this is not the strongest move. Yeah, also now the a3 square, because of b3, the a3 square is clear for my bishop, which it seems like he's not doing all that much. He's keeping maybe the rook away from c1, but what's that? At my behest and whim, I can play bishop to b2, and then the bishop and the pawn are protecting each other and making life a little more difficult than otherwise for white's rook on a1. I think most likely the rook will be coming to d1, but it's not 100% clear. Rook d8 is a good move. We're going to develop this rook into the game. Now rook at f to e8 is with the idea of pushing the e pawn forward, creating threats against the bishop and the knight that are on d3 and f3 respectively. Bishop c2 is strong. We keep the tension on the d file because this is important. The file is very important. You can almost consider pawn to e5 as a bit of a, is this even a pawn sacrifice? Because if rook takes d8, then rook takes d8, knight takes e5. I think black has strong options thereafter. It might have lost that pawn in the center, but then rook to d2 is very strong, attacking white's bishop on c2, and there are ways that this could parlay or go together with promotion threat on c1. This pawn is actually closer. This pawn is pretty darn close to promotion and made closer so after knight takes e5. I think it's for that reason that my opponent chose to play h3. I'm going to kick this knight and just try to, there aren't that many of these pawns that I have advanced, but they're doing some good work positionally with the c pawn controlling d2 to some extent, where my rook might venture. Also, the pawn at e4 is blocking a lot of my opponent's bishop's scope because this pawn is protected. So black is doing well here. One pawn of material and then 2 additional points of material based on the evaluation bar, right? These units are made to be roughly equal. That this says -3, that's like the computer's saying. Black has the advantage in some way equal to 3 pawns. Or if you want to think about it, 1 knight or 1 bishop, that kind of thing. It could even be black is up the exchange and a pawn. That'd be another way to do that. Okay, so but this is black's doing well here with one of these 3 points owing its presence to a material advantage. The other 2, this is strong to see as many as 2 points of an evaluation bar is owed to either coming tactical wins that black can enforce or just overall ancillary pluses, ancillary benefits in the position. Sometimes dynamic ones. We would look for some things on this board. Black's rooks are more central, although d1's pretty darn good. White's knight on h2. It will take time for this knight to become a strong factor, and the best way of doing so right now would be on g4, where black can choose to double pawns and so on. So black's doing well with 1 point extra material, and even more than that in terms of dynamic, positional, and tactical and strategic factors. All right, so here's black. It was black to move here. I played h6. Why not? My thoughts here. Why not? This is aloof for my king at some point in the future. And it's a bit of a waiting move, but black is in a position to levy a bit of a wait. So I played h6. And that being said, white centralizes a rook. I think that rook d2 was, I'm sure, a mistake. Let's see how and why. The computer likes rook takes d2, c takes d2, and then rook to d1, and then bishop. We have it the same as far as rook, all the way through rook to d1. Let's see what would have been better than rook to d2. The computer likes knight h4. No, sorry, knight h5. This takes the advantage of the fact that though white has 2 attackers on e4, black can afford to play knight h5 because one of these attackers moves, and there are all the variations. The variations I can see would include the black move, rook takes d1, and sometimes that would be rook takes d1 check, depending on which one of these pieces move. So rook takes d1, and then the tactics just work out. I don't really want to go through them one by one, but knight to h5 would have been a better move here for black. It's not an obvious move. So maybe in a quick game like this, I'm not quite as against my move choice as I would otherwise be. Anyway, I played rook to d2. which is a forcing move, a forcing move is not a forcing move, it's a strong move, attacking the undefended bishop on c2. Captures lead to some complications here with the pawn traveling to d2 and then possibly promoting. The great move, the correct move, rook takes d2, c takes d2, and then when... Oh, yeah, no, I have to disagree with the computer on this. Because the best move here is considered... Actually, the computer's line on here, including rook takes d2, this is not good. One of the rare instances where the computer is wrong, because c takes d2, rook to d1, bishop to c1. You know, the bishop color is at odds with the pertinent square color, so that's out. The rook would have to give himself up for the pawn, not for the bishop, for the pawn. So if he captures the bishop, then d takes c1 equals queen check, and the bishop on c2 will hang. All right, this is better for black than what the computer had calculated. Yeah. You would look at it this way: ahead of pawn, this white rook on d1 is hopelessly landlocked. For even to escape to f1, the only other safe square, he's hitting at the back of his own pawn. The knight on h2 would be lost at f3 to my e4 pawn, or slightly better, to g4, a capture, and there's doubled pawns now on the g file. So black's doing very, very well here. Let's see that the computer will come to realize this in a few moves. Rook to d8. This is the computer realizing this, because now it's clear that the main feature of this position is the pawn at d2. From a human point of view, from a practical, pragmatic perspective, knight takes d2 is a good move. It does simplify things a bit, but the simplifications are at least trying along the way. And black has to find the right moves in order to avoid some tactical mishap on the central two files. And that move, I liked rook d7. It's safe, doesn't lose the bishop, doesn't lose the rook. I like that white is playing here a feisty game, and black has just enough time to pull the bishop way back. How far back? To a5, I think. That's about diagonally three full squares, 4 squares if you count the endpoints. That's how far back. And then white captures on d7, knight takes d7, and black's up a full piece. One thing to be aware of is that the bishops are at odds with each other's color. They're opposite colored bishops, so it would be good for black to try to trade the knight for the bishop, because trading bishop for bishop is going to be really hard unless you have two attackers ready to pounce, in turn against one another. Other than that, black's doing fantastic here. It seems like each saving move I started here. Each saving move for black, one after the other, is just barely in time, just barely in place. Like rook d7, barely in time, barely in place. king to attack the bishop, and then just barely in the nick of time, uh, bishop to a5. The rooks exchange. The king goes forward for this attack. And to be honest, why not? Bishop takes e4. I don't know. I think bishop takes e4 is probably a stronger move here. Anyway, things are just barely in the nick of time, as Taylor would say, to salvage a coherent position. With the trade of bishop for knight on e4, and black has the only minor piece. So I'm going to set this pawn in motion on the h file. And this here black with, this is me with pressed for time. Both sides pressed for time here. I like this nifty move, bishop to g8. It creates difficulty with the time pressure because the pawn on h5 is unassailable. We'll go through it one by one here. King to g6, and then the pawn cannot be reached on the h file. It'll be too quick for any of white's pawns, and the king backpedaling in some manner or another is too slow. So g6 is out. g5 cuts into the scope of black's bishop on g8. It's just not allowed by rule. g4 also not allowed by rule because of the pawns owning the g4 square. This is a really tough thing. It's almost like a Star Warsian force field, right? It's not, you can see through it. It's there. You can touch it with maybe with a lightsaber, but you got to wait for that door to open up before you can attack Darth Maul. That's what we got going here. And then if, for instance, a time-saving move, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, there's h4, because even though that allows king g4, h4 is still protected by the g8 rook. So that's kind of a time dump if you're looking for, if I'm looking for some way to navigate my king to something like that. I'm looking for my king to, become more relevant than on g8. I called this g8. The bishop is blocking a bit. It's d8. Did I? I don't recall. This is all with bishop d8, my friends. And then I did just exactly that. Pawn to h4. It requires the most accurate move by my opponent to even keep the h4 pawn at bay, or just some accurate moves here. All right, so black has the board won, but with 1.2 seconds left, I can make at most 12 moves. And I think some of my time went into thin air, yeah. So maybe not thin air, but I didn't make this as a pre-move in time. So I got the draw out of the game, and the win on the board. Some decent accuracy and so on. All right. All right, so there you have it. Kind of a game that was mostly equal. So here, the queen g4 was just a blunder, missing the main one on d7. There were good moves for black, but I found rook d8 in time and earned the win as a result. All right, we'll go to the main game. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.